Hey guys, Rollout here. Welcome back to Builder's Block. This week I'm doing a little product review. We Love What You Build sent me some stuff to take a look at, so stay tuned for it. I also continue my ongoing project from last episode, and spoiler alert, it's a Gundam! Remember that there is a public Builder's Block Discord server, invite in the description, and don't forget to consider supporting the show on Patreon as well. But now, let's get started. So recently I was sent a couple of review samples from a company called We Love What You Build. They're actually the same people behind the service MockHub, which you might have heard about. But they have their own line of decorative Lego art pieces. A little while back, they came out with a poster that's a periodic table of elements that has every single Lego color on it. But what I was more interested in are these ambient light Lego letters, because of course my signature is an I and an X, and I thought it would be cool to have these on display in my office. But before we take a look at them, I do want to mention that there is a link down below, which will take you to the website where you can purchase these. Make sure you use my offer code ROLLOUT at checkout, and you'll get 10% off your order. Plus, it'll help out the channel. So what's kind of interesting is that you can get these either pre-built or as a kit that you put together yourself. And you might be thinking, like, it's a Lego set, why wouldn't I want to build it myself? Well, I actually have some thoughts about that, because if you're going into this expecting it to be like building a Lego set, you might be thrown for a loop, because this feels a lot more like an arts and crafts project than it does building a Lego set. It's $10 more to get it pre-built, but at the end of the day, honestly, I almost think it's worth it. Especially, like I said, if you're considering this to feel like building a Lego set, which personally, I don't think it does. I find it a little bit tedious to build one of these yourself. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. I decided to get one of each. I decided to get the I pre-built, which you can see here. You open it up, it's perfectly built and ready to go right out of the box, which is really nice. And then I got the X as a kit, which you can see once you open it up, you get some numbered bags with lots of parts and pieces inside. You got to build it yourself, and you get the instructions upon order, which are digital. You don't get any physical instructions. You have to request digital instructions for the kit version of this. So here's what you get with the I. Again, very, very simple, and it's ready to go right out of the box. It is a Lego letter lamp with a USB cord, and then you get a little freebie pack of stickers. You can buy these stickers individually on the website as well, but I was surprised to see that each one of these letters actually comes with a set of these too. Here is what you get with the kit version, and I will say that it seems to me that the letter X is one of the more complex letters. It has plenty of curves and strange angles compared to some of the others, and I feel like this kit in particular might be a little bit more tedious to build than some of the others. So keep that in mind. But of course, you also get a pack of stickers with this as well. And here are all of these stickers included. There's a nice selection. From what I can tell, both packs of stickers are exactly the same. I like the overall design aesthetic, the marketing aesthetic for We Love What You Build. I especially love the stickers here that are just Lego bricks, the 1x1 bricks and the 2x4 bricks. Those are my favorite by far. I might actually put those on something. So let's talk about the building process here, because while there might be an easier way to do this, I found it extremely fiddly putting this together. It took me about an hour to put together this letter, but the thing is, most of that building time had nothing to do with actual Lego pieces. It comes with these laser cut sheets. You get a sheet of cardboard for the back, and then you get these like semi-transparent cardstock sheets that also have a laser cut film on it that you have to peel off of both sides, which is a little bit fiddly, of course. But then none of these bricks that line the edge of this letter are secured together. They are only secured by the holes in the laser cut sheet here. Now, the instructions, I suppose, would have you put them all out on the table in the shape of the letter and then line up the sheet on top of it, which seems like an absolute nightmare. I guess if you're using a Lego base plate, it might be a little bit easier to do that, but then you'd have to remove the base plate, and it just doesn't seem like the best idea. What I did was flip the sheet over and place each of the Lego bricks into these slots. Then I took the cardboard box that the set comes in, placed it on top, and flipped the whole thing over so that the studs were facing upward. From here, you add another layer of bricks to secure everything together, and at that point, it's a lot more solid, of course. But this step in particular is very strange to me. And again, it feels a lot more like an arts and crafts project than it does building a Lego set. And if you're not into that, it might be worth the extra $10 just to get one of these pre-built right out of the box, because that is really, really nice. Now, if you're really into that arts and crafts experience and you are expecting that going into this, go ahead, save $10, get the kit version. For me, I was not so into it. From here, you have to line the inner walls of the letter with an LED strip that it comes with. It's just kind of a standard adhesive LED strip. You peel the backing off and you line it all the way across that inner surface from start to finish. It has a slot here for the USB cord. And once it's all done, it's pretty much ready to go. You just have to plug it in and the letter lights up. I actually didn't find this part of the process too bad. Even though that, again, the letter X, I feel, is one of the more complex ones, and there's tons of corners you have to stick these LEDs around, in a way I found it kind of fun. So this was way less stressful than the previous step. Now, I decided to open up the letter I just to see if there was any difference between the two internally. And of course, the letter I is way, way more simple. So there's a lot less corners to stick the LED strip around. But something very interesting I noticed is that it actually uses a slightly different LED strip. Inside this letter, the LED strip doesn't have its own adhesive. Instead, it's stuck to the inner walls with individual, separate adhesive strips. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I would guess it's because this is a slightly cheaper option and it's just more intuitive to have the sticky back version if the consumer is building it themselves. I just found it odd that they are slightly different. It doesn't actually change how they function in any way. They still illuminate in exactly the same way. So if you get one and the other, they will match, even though the method of adhesive is slightly different internally. I guess if that bothers you for some reason, make sure your letters match. But again, it is worth noting. Now, I do want to mention something about the letter I in particular as well. And it's that I feel like it could have used a couple of extra plates on the back, because when you put these together, the back panel is just a normal piece of cardboard that's fastened in place with some normal Lego plates and corners. And on the letter I, that back panel kind of buckles up a little bit in the middle, causing light to bleed through. And I feel like that could have just been easily solved with a couple of more plates in the middle. I suppose you could just do that yourself if you wanted to. Personally, I feel like it's something that We Love What You Build could easily fix themselves as well. Here it is from the back. Of course, light does come through the cardboard panel ever so slightly. Light also bleeds through the bricks just a little bit. It's actually a lot more apparent in this picture than it is in person, but you're not going to be looking at these letters from the back, so I don't really think that any of this is much of a problem. Here are the two letters built side by side, and of course I think it's worth bringing up that your value may vary depending on which letter you decide to get. It is worth mentioning that every single one of these letters, all 26 of them, are the exact same price. And obviously, it would appear to me at least that the letter X has twice as many bricks as the letter I. So consider that when you're deciding which letter you want to get. Here are the letters Illuminated, and it's a very simple mechanism. You just plug them in to a power source and they light up. There's no switch on and off. There's no color changing capabilities. They are just a simple warm light LED strip that illuminates these. And for my purposes, that's fine, and it looks pretty good. These are actually quite bright. I feel like with a couple of these letters, you can actually use them as a desk lamp. Like, they are that bright, which I feel does limit their usability in some cases. Like, if you have these on display in a room, I feel as if they might be a little bit too bright to leave the lamps on constantly. If your intention was to use these as a nightlight, depending on your preference, they may or may not be too bright for that. But like up on a shelf, I think they're just bright enough. Very noticeable. I think they look great. Again, around the edges, you do have some light bleeding through the bricks, bleeding through the cardboard, but at a glance, on display, you're really not going to notice that, and I think that these look fantastic. You just have to account for how you're powering them, where you're plugging them in, if you're able to turn them off. Because again, I think it would be great if these had a switch so that you could turn them off, because I feel like they're a little bit too bright to have them illuminated 24/7. But maybe it's a good thing that they're bright. If you really want some bright light letters on your wall, this is perfect. Of course, that's what they're made for. And it really is striking. It's super, super noticeable and really cool looking in the corner of a room. Once again, if you're interested in getting your own letter or letters or anything else We Love What You Build has to offer, you can find them with the link down below. Remember to use my offer code ROLLOUT at checkout and you'll get 10% off. Alright, with that out of the way, let's pick back up where we left off last week and continue working on the Gundam Exia. I built all of his armaments, the entire 7-sword package. So he's got the Gean shield, sword, and blades on his hips. You can see that the sword folds up onto his arm properly into rifle mode. It has the smaller shield on the side there, and it actually does attach at 2 different points. He holds on to the rifle, and then it continues on to attach to his forearm. And that's why I put the headlight bricks in his forearm, in order to facilitate that. You can see that the Gean shield attaches much in the same way, so that it has a pivot. I also really like how those new slope curves curved elements with the wedge tip allow the Geon shield to be shaped a lot more accurately than it ever has been able to before. The Geon blades attach to his hips slightly differently than they're supposed to, but I think given the size and the style of this build overall, this is acceptable. In order to make them attach properly, I probably would need an additional piece, and I don't like that. I think it's much more elegant for them just to straight up attach to his hips like this. Here he is from the back, and at this point I had very much underestimated how long the Geon blades are supposed to be. I made them way too short here. He's supposed to have one long blade and one short blade, and I made both of them a bit too short. I would fix that later on. But you can see that I just used normal tiles for the actual blades themselves. These weapons are supposed to look a lot more sharp than this. They don't come to a flat point like this. They come to a very, very sharp point. The reason I decided to just make them tiles is for the sake of elegance and the sake of preserving their side profile, because I actually think that's much more important. I tried a lot of different ways to give them more of a triangular angled tip, and it's very difficult, and the options are super limited. What it ends up being is way too bulky. I can make them more accurately shaped, and you'll see an attempt later on at that, but I think what's actually more important is making sure they are very, very thin, and I think that tracks a lot better, and I think that this is the easiest way to do it. Of course, I could have used actual Lego swords or blades. The thing is, so few of them come both long and short in the same style, and I think that's very, very important that you have one long blade and one short blade for the Gundam Exia. Now, their color might be in dispute as well. I decided to make them gray here, the actual blades themselves. A lot of the model kits have these blades in white. A lot of the action figures do as well. I think the master grade and perfect grade kits have like a white center and a silver or gray blade surrounding it. But actually, watching the show, watching the animation of the Exia, these blades are very much a different color than the rest of Exia's armor. Exia is white, these swords are gray because they're coated with the same Geon conductive material that he has in like the ribbons on his arms and legs, and so I decided to make them the same color as that. I think it's most accurate in this style and at this scale. So here he is in more of an action pose, wielding the Geon blades, which once again are too short. I know that it'll be changed later on, but you can see that the larger Geon sword is actually reconfigured on his arm in order to free up his right hand so that he can wield one of the Geon blades or a beam saber. And this is accomplished with just a little bit of parts forming. He has two plates that attach the sword to his arm, and you basically stack them on top of each other instead of having them parallel, so that the sword kind of swings out on his arm. Now, this is accomplished with a hinge, obviously, on most of the model kits, but at this scale, that was just a little bit impossible. And I think it's perfectly acceptable considering so many Gundam model kits are responsible for so much worse in the parts forming department. One thing that I really wanted to get right is the way that his Geon sword actually swings out. Because not only does it swing up into the traditional arm blade configuration that's so iconic for the Gundam Exia, but furthermore, it actually hinges even further forwards, that the guard on the back of his arm becomes a guard at the front of his hand, and he holds it like a proper broadsword. There are actually a ton of Lego Gundam Exias out there, and I am amazed at how few of them actually get this right. I'm responsible for it as well. The Gian sword on my original Gundam Exia and even on my 00, they were all awful and did not actually function the way they are supposed to. So I made it a really important point to get it right this time, and now that I've done it, granted, it was a struggle, but now that I've done it at this scale, I don't think there's much of an excuse anymore. Like I said, I did struggle. The ratios, the relationship between his forearm and the blades that it can double hinge out properly was really, really limiting. You can see the relationship between the headlight brick and the clip tile on his left arm here. That is entirely necessary so that the Gian rifle and the attachment point on his forearm are right next to each other, allowing the double hinge on the shield element to function properly. That's extremely important, and there is no other way to do it at this scale that I was able to find. It makes proportioning his arms extremely difficult, and I will talk about that later on. A few people had some issues with my Gundam Exia's proportions, and I will talk about that a little bit later. I will talk about why his proportions are the way they are and why it's so difficult to change them. One of the big reasons is this sword and the way that this sword works. But I think it's extremely important for the Gundam Exia that this sword works properly. I should also mention that I just love the way this looks, and I love the snot technique on the blade so that it actually has the proper layered details for the blade itself and the inner greebles. I think that's extremely cool. Now, because it's a no-brainer, and once you've built Exia, it's easy to convert it into its other variations, I also built the Exia Repair 1 and Repair 2. So here is the Repair 1 from the beginning of Season 2 with the cloak on his arm and all of the battle damage. He's missing half of his face. I got it into the iconic shooting pose from that first episode of Season 2 here. I used a very obscure cloth element for the sort of tarp that he uses to replace his missing arm. This comes from a single set. It's from a Star Wars set. It's Luke Skywalker's ancient temple hut thing. I actually happened to buy that set when it came out just for its pieces. And I remember when I bought it, I took a look at this piece and went, this would be really good for a mini Exia repair someday. And then I threw it in a bag and completely forgot about it. And then when I decided to convert my small scale Exia here into the Exia repair, I struggled to come up with a solution for this. I was looking at all these different cloth elements. The CCBS ones are way too big. Normal minifigure capes are way too small. And then finally, I remembered that this exists, and I remembered that I have it. And so I used it, and here we go. It is a little small, I will admit, but the size of this cape does vary from source material to source material. Some of the model kits make this cape appear a lot smaller than it is in the actual anime. It is, granted, a lot longer in the actual anime, but I think it's like the high grade conversion kit that has it much, much smaller, about the size of his arm, which is about the length that it is here. You can also see he's got the broken Gian blade, which, because of the way I built the Gian blade, it made it actually quite easy to build it in this broken configuration. For his head, I went with something that is not perfectly accurate, but it's something that is easy to convert because you're able to just pull off one of the V-fins and you're able to just pull off the side of his head and replace it with this. I cheated a little bit by using a very small piece of flex tube in there, but at this scale, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do, and I think that this tracks just well enough. That eye is, a little too far to the left, but when you see the entire Exia repair, I think it reads just fine. I think it's good enough. You can see that there are some parts replaced on his legs, on his chest, in order to get that battle-damaged look. I decided to make all of the battle-damaged elements in black rather than gray, just so that they stand out more. And in this picture in particular, you can see the full length of that cape. Like I said, it is a little bit too short, but I think considering its color, considering the way it's able to attach to his body, and considering that frayed edge on the end, really, it's the perfect piece for this. And even if it's a little bit too small, I think it's the best option by far. And then here is the Exia Repair 2 from the final episode. All of the light gray elements have been replaced with sleeker armor panels, either in white or in blue. The configuration of the beam sabers is a little bit different, and the blade of the Gian sword has been replaced with a new green one, and that's about it. It's very similar to the original Exia. The Gian sword functions much the same. Unfortunately, they don't make the inverted curve slopes in green, so I had to change the construction of the blade a little bit, and it's slightly less solid because it's two symmetrical pieces facing towards each other, and they can become misaligned. But as long as you're careful, it isn't too much of a problem. You can get him into something resembling his iconic charging pose from the last scene, but it's not quite right because he doesn't have the exact butterfly joint in his shoulders that he needs to pull it off perfectly. But say it with me, at this scale, I think it's good enough. Now let's talk about his proportions a little bit, because there was some concern about his limbs being a little bit too short for his body. And despite the inconsistencies of Exia's proportions across all forms of media, I suppose that is true. His proportions are definitely stylized. But I want to talk about why that is and why I made the decisions that I made. So here is Exia with slightly different proportions. I was able to make his legs a little bit longer and his arms a little bit longer so that the proportions are slightly more accurate. Maybe not perfect, but a little bit closer than they were previously. My issue is that there are techniques involved here. There are certain conventions at play here that I just do not like, and I prefer the more stylized, less accurate, more simplified version of his limbs. So I used robot claws in his hips here so that his legs can be extended slightly, and I learned real well with the Matoi tech that using robot claws in the hips of a robot is awful. That piece loses clutch so quickly, and it's such a wobbly connection that I just don't think it's worth it here, and I much prefer the alternative. It's kind of cool that you get an extra rotation here. Again, it is a little bit more accurate proportionally, but I prefer the building conventions of the previous build a little bit better. It's more solid, it's more elegant, and ultimately I prefer it. Now, there are a couple different methods of extending his arms on display here, and I don't like either of them. On the right, you can see that I've extended his upper arm, and when you do that, it throws off his jointage completely. Now, the jointage on the left side isn't quite perfect either, but I think it's a whole lot more natural looking than the one on the right. And when you do something like this and extend his upper arm, just because of how the rest of his arm works, I don't think it looks very good at all. Now, when it comes to extending his lower arm, I mentioned previously that the ratio of his hand and that headlight brick is very, very important in order for making his Gian sword function properly. And so that relationship needs to remain the same. It would look a whole lot nicer if I could extend his lower arm at the wrist. Unfortunately, that is impossible. And so my only option would be to extend it a little bit higher up. And I think when you do that, the Gian sword looks extremely awkward because it attaches much lower on his arm, ostensibly. And I just don't like the way that looks either. So no matter how I extend his limbs, personally, I just don't like how it turns out. And again, that is personal preference, and some of these methods might work for you better than they work for me. I just want to kind of explain my stance on it and explain why I chose to make his proportions a little bit more stylized, if not exactly accurate. How I see it is that Lego is always going to be stylized. There are always going to be liberties taken. Proportions don't always need to be exact. Details don't always need to be there because Lego is an art form that is up to interpretation. So here is the attempt I mentioned earlier at making the Gian blades a little bit more accurately shaped, more triangular. And I think it's a really cool technique on display here, so I think it was worth showing off. Unfortunately, I think this construction is just way too bulky. Anyway, as you can see, it uses some roller skate elements to attach the tiles at a really sharp angle. And while from the top, these are shaped more accurately from the side, from the profile angle, when they attach to Exia's hips, when he holds them, they are just far, far too bulky, unfortunately. But again, I thought it was worth showing off. Here is Exia from behind with now properly lengthened G-in blades. Again, they are just the tiles, but now I have made the long blade much longer, and the short blade is actually as long as the long blade was previously. These are supposed to be basically as long as his legs. The long blade is supposed to be the length of just the blade portion of his Gian sword, so I fixed that ratio, and now they are a lot more accurate, and I think it looks a lot better, of course. Now, another thing I experimented with is head sculpts for all of the other Gundam Meisters. I don't know if I'm going to go ahead and build them all right away. I really like the idea of having at least all 4 of the original Celestial Being on display, just like I have the entire Blitz team from Zoid's New Century. That's something I want to work towards in the future. I would like to finish some of my other work in progress mocks before I continue this project, but I thought I would experiment with some head designs at the very least. So here is a possible head design for the Dynamis. It is very similar to the Exia, just with a different colored V-fin, some different panels on the head. I do like how you are able to get the scope V-fin functional because the robot, or minifigure hands rather, can slide down, allowing a stud to plug in there. So I think that's, again, a very elegant and simple way of accomplishing that, and I do like it. Here is a possible head design for the Kyrios with the fin on the back of the head and the more angular cheek armor, and then here is a possible design for the Virtue's head with the larger cheek armor, and once again, a yellow V-fin. Strangely, Exia is the only one of the four with a white V-fin. Go figure. As far as Nautilus goes, I think that would be very difficult to pull off at this scale with the armor purging the way it's supposed to. I'd probably just have to build an entirely separate Nautilus. And I'm not sure I want to, because I would always just want the Virtue on display instead, and it would kind of feel weird having both on display. I don't know. We will cross that road once we get there. Finally, I wanted to show the new Exia and the new Liger Zero side by side. This is actually a recreation of a shot from one of my oldest videos. In my very first Liger Zero showcase I did over 10 years ago, I put my old Exia next to my old Liger Zero, and they were absolutely awful in every way. So I think I consider this somewhat of a redemption. I'll post a side-by-side comparison on Twitter, I think, so you can see just how far we've come. Or you can watch that old video, but be prepared for some terrible content. Don't say I didn't warn ya. Well, yet another week goes by, and Drigger remains unfinished. I don't know if anyone's hotly anticipating it, but I promise that next week I'll try and make some progress. Special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, especially my leader class patrons, Valraven, Beyond the Brick, and Beta. Until next time, this has been Rollout, signing off.